Maya had not slept in 36 hours. Her eyes burned as she stared at the holographic displays that filled her room, but she could not stop working. She was close to something big, something that made her heart race with excitement and terror. The final presentations were tomorrow. Her classmates had spent the last week polishing their research, preparing elegant demonstrations of their progress. Kex and Vex had developed mathematical models so beautiful that they made other students weep. Quinn 9 had built a device that could measure quantum consciousness interactions with stunning precision. Maya had something different. She had something that might actually solve the paradox. It had started 3 days ago when she was reviewing her research on human creativity. She had been reading about how jazz musicians improvise, how they create perfect music from seemingly random inspiration. The key insight hit her like lightning. They were not creating order from chaos. They were finding the hidden order that already existed within the chaos. That was when everything clicked into place. Maya pulled up her main working display, which showed the quantum cognitive resonance framework she had been developing. For weeks it had been just an interesting theory, a way to describe how consciousness might work with quantum uncertainty instead of against it. But now she saw something more. It's not just theory, she whispered to her empty room. It's a map. Her framework did not just describe how consciousness worked. It showed how to build technology that could work the same way. Instead of trying to control quantum systems through brute force calculation, her approach would create machines that could dance with uncertainty, riding quantum probability waves the way surfers rode ocean waves. Maya's hands shook as she began to type. The implications were staggering. Quantum communication systems that could transmit thoughts directly between minds of different species. Computational devices that could solve problems by embracing paradox instead of eliminating it. Even faster than light, travel systems that worked by existing in multiple locations simultaneously until they chose where to be. But she needed to prove it worked. Theory was not enough, especially not for a human trying to convince a galaxy of superior alien minds. Maya opened a simulation program and began building a virtual test of her framework. The model was incredibly complex, requiring her to balance thousands of variables that all influenced each other in nonlinear ways. Traditional programming would never work. She needed code that could think creatively, that could improvise solutions the way human minds did. She worked through the night fueled by coffee and the growing certainty that she was on the verge of the biggest scientific breakthrough in centuries. As dawn approached on Kepler Prime, casting purple light through her window, Maya finished her simulation. "Run test sequence," she commanded her computer. The holographic display exploded into motion. Waves of probability cascaded through virtual quantum fields, creating patterns that looked almost alive. Maya held her breath as the simulation attempted to model consciousness using her quantum cognitive resonance framework. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, order emerged from the chaos. The random quantum fluctuations began to synchronize, creating stable patterns that maintained themselves even as they constantly changed. It was like watching a river find its course through rough terrain, fluid, dynamic, but somehow inevitable. Maya stared at the results in wonder. Her simulation was not just modeling consciousness. It was creating something that looked remarkably like actual conscious awareness. The virtual system was making choices, solving problems, even showing what looked like curiosity about its own existence. "Oh my God," Maya breathed. "It actually works." But she needed more than a simulation. She needed physical proof that her framework could solve real problems. Maya looked at her tablet, checking the time. She had 8 hours before the presentations began. 8 hours to turn her theoretical breakthrough into something she could demonstrate. Maya grabbed her tools and began building. Unlike her alien classmates, she did not have access to advanced quantum fabrication technology. She had to work, with basic components, cobbling together a device that looked more like a sculpture made from spare parts than a sophisticated scientific instrument. But as she worked, Maya realized that this limitation might actually be an advantage. Her device was messy, improvised, held together with creative solutions rather than precise engineering. It was, in other words, perfectly suited for the chaotic approach her framework required. By midday, Maya had built what she called a quantum cognitive interface. It was not pretty, a tangle of wires, crystals, and processing cores that hummed with unstable energy, but it incorporated every principle of her quantum cognitive resonance theory. The device was designed to solve a specific problem that had been considered impossible, translating thoughts between species with completely different types of consciousness. Humans thought in associative patterns, Zen-theory and mathematical structures, hegemony minds in logical sequences. No translation system had ever been able to bridge these differences because they were too fundamental. But Maya's device would not translate thoughts. It would find the quantum resonance patterns that underlay all conscious experience, regardless of species. If her theory was correct, consciousness was consciousness, whether it belonged to a human, a crystal being, or a mechanical intelligence. Maya connected the device to her computer and ran a diagnostic. Warning messages flashed across her screen. The system was unstable, operating outside normal parameters, generating energy patterns that made her university's safety monitors nervous. Everything was working exactly as she had hoped. She activated her communication system and sent a message to her research team. "I need volunteers for a test. It might be dangerous." To her surprise, Kex and Vex responded immediately, followed by Quinn9. Even more surprising, their messages indicated genuine curiosity rather than politeness. Over the past weeks, as Maya's unconventional approach had yielded unexpected insights, her teammates had begun to respect her methods even if they did not understand them. When her teammates arrived, Maya's room looked like a mad scientist's laboratory. Cables snaked across the floor. Holographic displays showed incomprehensible data streams, and the quantum cognitive interface sat in the center like some alien artifact from a future that had not happened yet. "Maya," Vex said, his translator, working to convey amazement, "what have you built?" "Either the solution to the quantum consciousness paradox," Maya said, "or the most spectacular failure in scientific history. Want to help me find out which?" Quinn9's red eyes studied the device with mechanical precision. "This appears to be incredibly dangerous. The energy readings alone could damage our neural systems." "Probably," Maya agreed cheerfully. "But think about what we might discover if it works." Kex clicked rapidly to his twin, then looked back at Maya. "What do you need us to do?" Maya explained her plan. Each of them would connect to the quantum cognitive interface and attempt to share a simple thought, their name, with the others. If her framework was correct, the device would find the quantum resonance patterns that allowed consciousness to exist in paradoxical states, and use those patterns to create a bridge between their different types of minds. "If I'm wrong," Maya said, "we might experience temporary confusion, headaches, possibly some minor neural disruption. If you're right, Quinn9 said, "you will have solved the greatest mystery in galactic science and created technology that could revolutionize consciousness studies." Maya nodded. "Plus, we'll probably get good grades on the project." Despite everything, her alien teammates made sounds that her translator identified as laughter. Over the weeks of working together, they had learned to appreciate Maya's peculiar, human sense of humor. "Let's do this," Kex said, speaking for all of them. Maya activated the quantum cognitive interface. The device began to hum with increasing intensity, its improvised components glowing with unstable energy. Holographic displays showed quantum probability waves dancing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Think your name," Maya instructed, as they all connected to the device. "Just your name as clearly as you can." Maya closed her eyes and thought. "Maya Chen, human from Earth, student at the Galactic Institute, solver of impossible problems." For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly Maya's consciousness exploded outward. She could feel Kex's mind, mathematical and precise, thinking in geometric patterns that mapped his name across 17 dimensions simultaneously. She experienced Vex's awareness, identical to his twins but somehow inverted, creating perfect symmetry in the quantum space they shared. Quinn9's mechanical consciousness touched hers, logical and efficient but surprisingly warm, translating identity into cascading sequences of binary poetry. And they could feel her in return, chaotic, creative, gloriously messy human consciousness that found connections where none should exist and created beauty from randomness. For 10 seconds, 4 completely different types of minds shared perfect understanding. When the connection ended, they sat, in stunned silence. It worked, Vex whispered. It actually worked. Kex confirmed. Quinn 9's red eyes flickered rapidly. Maya, do you understand what you have accomplished? You have not just solved the quantum consciousness paradox. You have proved that consciousness is a universal phenomenon that transcends as the grand auditorium of the Galactic Institute had never felt so large or so intimidating. Maya stood in the preparation area backstage, watching, through a gap in the curtains as hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the seats. Faculty members, advanced students, and even visiting scholars from other institutions had come to witness the final presentations. Professor Zeth Kalar stood at the center of the stage, his crystal body blazing with ceremonial light. Today marks the conclusion of our semester-long research into the quantum consciousness paradox, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. Our students have spent 3 months attempting to solve a problem that has challenged the greatest minds in galactic history. Maya's stomach churned with nervous energy. She was scheduled to present last, after her teammates had shown their work. Part of her wondered if Professor Zethkalar had arranged it that way deliberately, hoping that her human approach would seem primitive compared to the sophisticated research of her alien classmates. Our first presentation comes from the Zenthari twins Kex and Vex, Professor Zethkalar continued. Maya watched as her teammates took the stage with fluid grace. Their forearms moved in perfect synchronization as they activated holographic displays that filled the air above the audience. Mathematical equations of breathtaking complexity floated like living art, each symbol precisely placed and elegantly connected to the others. We have developed a comprehensive mathematical framework for describing consciousness in quantum terms, Kex announced, his translated voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Our equations demonstrate that conscious awareness can be modeled as a series of probability cascades, Vex continued, each thought representing the collapse of quantum potential into classical reality. The audience murmured with appreciation as the twins walked through their mathematical proofs. Maya had to admit their work was beautiful, clean, logical, and thoroughly convincing within the established parameters of galactic science. But she also noticed something the audience might have missed. Their equations described consciousness perfectly, but they did not explain how it could actually exist. When the twins finished, the applause was respectful but not overwhelming. They had done excellent work within traditional boundaries, but they had not broken new ground. Our next presenter is Quinn 9 from the Hegemony Core Worlds, Professor Zethkalar announced. The mechanical being's presentation was a masterpiece of engineering precision. His device could measure quantum consciousness interactions with incredible accuracy, mapping the exact moment when quantum possibilities collapsed into conscious thoughts. The technology was so advanced that even Maya, with her growing understanding of quantum systems, could barely follow the technical specifications. This instrument represents a significant advancement in consciousness detection technology, Quinn 9 explained, his red eyes glowing with pride. We can now observe the quantum signature of conscious awareness with unprecedented precision. Again, the applause was appreciative but measured. Quinn 9 had built something remarkable, but like the twins, he had worked within existing frameworks rather than challenging them. He could measure the paradox more accurately than anyone before, but he had not explained why it existed. Other students presented their research, each offering valuable insights and impressive technical achievements. But as Maya watched from backstage, she realized that all of them shared the same fundamental assumption, that the quantum consciousness paradox was a problem to be solved by eliminating contradictions rather than understanding them. Finally, Professor Zethkalar called her name. Our final presenter is Maya Chen, representing the planet Earth, he said, and Maya could hear the carefully controlled amusement in his translated voice. Miss Chen has been exploring alternative approaches to our research question. Maya walked onto the stage carrying her battered tablet, and a small device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and held together with determination. Compared to the elegant displays her classmates had used, her equipment looked almost embarrassingly primitive. She looked out at the sea of alien faces, hundreds of beings whose civilizations had been conducting advanced science when humans were still learning to make fire. For a moment, the magnitude of what she was attempting threatened to overwhelm her. Then she remembered the moment 3 days ago when her quantum cognitive interface had worked, when 4 different types of consciousness had touched each other across the impossible gulf between species. She remembered the wonder in Quinn 9's mechanical voice and the excited clicking of the Xanthari twins when they realized what she had accomplished. Maya activated her tablet and began to speak. For 800 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy have tried to solve the quantum consciousness paradox by treating it as a problem that needed to be fixed, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast auditorium. They have assumed that consciousness and quantum mechanics are in conflict, and that science must choose between them. She activated her display, showing not elegant equations or sophisticated devices, but a chaotic web of connections that looked more like art than science. But what if the paradox is not a problem to be solved? What if it is a fundamental feature of how consciousness actually works? A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Professor Zethkalar's crystal form flickered with what Maya had learned to recognize as intense interest mixed with skepticism. Maya continued, her confidence growing as she explained her framework. Humans have a saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Instead of trying to force consciousness to behave logically, what if we learn to work with its natural quantum nature? She walked through her quantum cognitive resonance theory, explaining how consciousness might surf probability waves instead of collapsing them, how it might create order within chaos rather than eliminating chaos entirely. The audience listened with growing fascination as she described thinking patterns that seemed impossible, but somehow made perfect sense. This is highly speculative theory, Professor Veltara from the Department of Consciousness Studies called out. Do you have any practical evidence to support these claims? Maya smiled and picked up her improvised device. I'm glad you asked. She activated the quantum cognitive interface, and the device began to hum with unstable energy. Warning displays flickered to life around the auditorium as the Institute's safety systems detected the unusual quantum signatures Maya's device was generating. This device incorporates every principle of quantum cognitive resonance theory, Maya explained as holographic displays showed the chaotic but somehow beautiful patterns her machine was creating. Instead of trying to control quantum systems through brute force, it dances with uncertainty, riding probability waves to achieve results that traditional methods consider impossible. She looked out at the audience, seeing expressions that ranged from confusion to fascination to outright disbelief. 3 days ago, I used this device to create a direct consciousness bridge between myself, Kex, Vex, and Quinn 9. For 10 seconds, 4 completely different types of minds shared perfect understanding across species boundaries that have never been crossed before. The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs. Professor Zethkalar's crystal form blazed so brightly that students in the front rows had to shield their optical sensors. That is impossible, Professor Veltara declared. Cross-species consciousness. Bridging has been attempted countless times with no success. It's impossible using traditional methods, Maya agreed. But my approach does not translate thoughts between different types of minds. It finds the quantum resonance patterns that underlie all consciousness, regardless of species. She activated the device's demonstration mode, showing simplified versions of the consciousness patterns she had detected during her test. Each species showed completely different surface-level thought structures, but underneath at the quantum level, they all shared the same fundamental resonance signatures. Consciousness is consciousness, Maya said simply. Whether it belongs to a human, a Xanthari, a hegemony intelligence, or any other thinking being, it operates according to the same quantum principles. The differences we see are like different languages describing the same underlying reality. The silence that followed was profound. Maya could hear her own heartbeat as hundreds of alien minds processed what she had just told them. Then, Professor, Feltera stood up. If what you claim is true, the implications are staggering. You are suggesting that consciousness is not just a universal phenomenon, but a quantum one that transcends the boundaries between thinking species. More than that, Maya said, her excitement building as she realized they were beginning to understand. The technology I have demonstrated is just the beginning. If consciousness really works the way my framework suggests, we could develop quantum communication systems that transmit thoughts directly between minds, computational devices that solve problems by embracing paradox, even faster than light travel systems that exist in multiple locations until they choose where to be. Professor Zethkalar stepped forward, his crystal form pulsing with rapid patterns Maya had never seen before. Miss Chen, what you are proposing? Jake Miller stood at the window of the transport ship and watched the stars move past. He had never been off Earth before. The 23-year-old biology student from Ohio could not believe he was really going to an alien school. His hands shook a little as he pressed them against the cold glass. The Galactic Educational Exchange Program had picked only 12 humans from millions of students who applied. Jake still remembered the day the letter came. His mother had cried happy tears. His father had shaken his hand and called him the smartest kid in their small town. Even his grandmother had smiled and said she knew he would do great things. The transport ship was huge. Jake had counted 47 different types of alien students on board. Some looked like giant bugs with too many legs. Others looked like walking rocks that glowed in the dark. There were small furry creatures with big eyes and tall thin beings that seemed to float rather than walk. Jake was one of only 3 humans on this particular ship. Dr. Amy Foster was the human medical officer assigned to watch over the exchange students. She was a kind woman in her 40s who had worked with aliens before. She told Jake and the other humans what to expect at the Zentari Academy. The Zentari were famous across the galaxy for their medical knowledge. Their school was the best place to study biology and healing. The journey took 2 weeks. Jake spent most of his time in the ship's library, reading about the different alien species he would meet. He learned that the Zentari looked like tall humans, but with blue skin and large black eyes. They lived much longer than humans and were very smart. Their planet Kethvar had 3 suns and purple oceans. Jake also met some of his future classmates during the trip. There was Vexthon, who came from a species called the Quarth. Vexthon looked like he was made of living crystal. His body was clear and sparkled with inner light. When he talked, his voice sounded like music. Vexthon told Jake that his people ate rocks and sunlight instead of food. Another student Jake met was Zilara from the planet Nemdor. She was small and covered in soft brown fur. She had 6 arms and moved very quickly. Her big green eyes never seemed to blink. Zilara could climb walls and hang upside down from the ceiling. She spoke in a high, fast voice and always seemed excited about everything. The 3 students became friends during the long journey. Jake taught them about Earth and human customs. He showed them pictures of his hometown with its green fields and blue sky. Vexthon and Zilara had never seen anything like Earth's forests and rivers. Their worlds were very different. Vexthon's home planet was mostly made of crystal caves and glass mountains. His people lived inside the crystal formations and got their energy from the light that passed through them. Zilara came from a forest world where the trees were so tall that some species never saw the ground. Her people lived in the treetops and rarely came down. Jake told them about his grandmother, who had taught him many things about plants and old remedies. She lived on a farm and grew her own food. She knew which plants could help sick people and which ones were dangerous. Jake had learned a lot from her during his childhood visits. When they finally reached Kethvar, Jake pressed his face to the window again. The planet was beautiful in a strange way. The 3 suns made the sky look orange and pink. The purple oceans reflected the light like mirrors. The cities looked like they had grown naturally instead of being built. The buildings curved and flowed like living things. The Zentari Academy sat on a hill overlooking one of the purple seas. The school buildings seemed to breathe and pulse with soft light. Gardens filled with glowing plants surrounded the structures. Jake could see students of many different species walking along paths that curved through the colorful landscape. Professor Kalish met the new students at the landing pad. He was tall even for a Zentari with dark blue skin and kind black eyes. He wore flowing robes that changed color as he moved. When he spoke, his voice was deep and calm. He welcomed each student in their own language, which impressed everyone. Jake, Vexthon, and Zilara were assigned to share living quarters in the same building. Their rooms were connected, but each was designed for their species' needs. Jake's room had a regular bed and furniture sized for humans. Vexthon's room had crystal formations where he could rest and absorb light. Zilara's room had platforms and ropes she could use to climb and swing around. The first few days at the academy were exciting but overwhelming. Jake attended his first xenobiology class with Professor Kalish. The classroom was filled with students from dozens of different worlds. Some breathed different gases and had to wear special masks. Others needed different temperatures and sat near heating or cooling devices. Jake quickly learned that humans had a unique way of looking at biological problems. While other species focused on advanced technology and complex theories, humans often found simple solutions that worked. Professor Kalish seemed very interested in Jake's ideas about adaptation and survival. The Academy's library was amazing. It contained knowledge from thousands of worlds and millions of years of study. Jake spent hours reading about different forms of life and how they had evolved on their home planets. He shared what he learned with Vexthon and Zilara, and they taught him about their worlds too. Everything seemed perfect at first. The food was good, the classes were interesting, and Jake was making friends with beings from across the galaxy. He sent messages home telling his family about his adventures. His grandmother wrote back with encouragement and reminded him to use the knowledge she had taught him. But after 2 weeks at the academy, something strange began to happen that would test everything Jake had learned. Jake first noticed something was wrong when Zilara came to breakfast with strange marks on 2 of her 6 arms. The marks looked like small bite wounds arranged in a triangle pattern. Each bite was no bigger than a pencil tip. But they looked red and angry against her brown fur. "What happened to your arms?" Jake asked as they sat down at their usual table in the dining hall. Zilara looked at the marks and shrugged with 4 of her shoulders. "I do not know. They were there when I woke up this morning. They do not hurt much, but they itch." Vexthon's crystal body flickered with concern. "Did you see what bit you? Were you outside your room during the night?" "No," Zilara said. "I was sleeping in my room all night. I always lock my door before bed. Nothing could have gotten in." Jake examined the bites more closely. They were definitely fresh, and the pattern was very strange. He had seen many insect bites during his childhood on the farm, but these looked different somehow. The spacing was too perfect, and the depth seemed wrong for any bug he knew about. Over the next few days, more students began showing up with similar bite marks. A tall, thin student from the Rigel system had them on his neck. 3 students from the water world of Aquatica had bites on their fins. Even some of the rock-like students from Granite Prime had small chips in their stone skin, arranged in the same triangle pattern. Dr. Foster called a meeting with all the human students. She looked worried as she spoke to them in the medical center. "We have a problem," she said. "These bite marks are appearing on students from many different species. The Zentari medical team cannot figure out what is causing them." Jake raised his hand. "Have they found any insects or parasites in the buildings?" "They have searched everywhere," Dr. Foster replied. "Their scanners can detect life forms smaller than dust particles. They found nothing that could cause these bites. What makes it worse is that the wounds are not healing properly." This was true. Jake had watched Zilara's bites over several days. Instead of getting better, they seemed to stay the same size and color. The Zentari doctors had tried their best healing treatments, but nothing worked. The bites just would not close up and heal. By the end of the first week, over 50 students were affected. The bites always appeared during sleep hours and always in groups of 3 arranged in a triangle. No student had ever seen what caused them. The Academy's security cameras showed nothing unusual during the night hours. Professor Kalish called an emergency meeting for all students and teachers. The large assembly hall was packed with worried beings from dozens of worlds. Some students had so many bite marks that they looked spotted. Others had bites in places that must have been very uncomfortable. "We are dealing with an unknown threat," Professor Kalish announced. "Our best scientists are working to identify the cause of these attacks. Until we find answers, we are considering sending all off-world students home for their safety." A wave of disappointed sounds filled the hall. Students had traveled from across the galaxy to attend the academy. Many had worked their whole lives for this chance. Jake felt sick at the thought of leaving before his studies were complete. After the meeting, Jake walked through the academy gardens with Vexthon and Zilara. Both of his friends now had multiple sets of bite marks. Vexthon's crystal body had small dark spots where something had damaged his structure. Zilara had bites on all 6 of her arms and even some on her back. "I do not understand," Vexthon said, his musical voice sounding sad. "How can something bite me? I am made of living crystal. Most creatures cannot even touch me without getting hurt." Jake thought about this as they walked past the glowing plants. Whatever was causing the bites could apparently harm any type of biology. It worked on crystal beings, furry creatures, water dwellers, and rock people. That suggested something very unusual. That night, Jake decided to stay awake and watch for whatever was causing the problems. He set up a chair by his window and kept his lights on. He had borrowed a magnifying device from the biology lab and planned to examine every inch of his room. Hours passed. Jake's eyes grew tired, but he forced himself to stay alert. Around 3 in the morning, he heard a soft sound from Zilara's room next door. It was a quiet scratching noise like tiny claws on wood. Jake grabbed his magnifying device and crept toward the wall between their rooms. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the wall itself. He pressed his ear against the surface and listened carefully. There it was again, a soft scratching and what sounded like very faint clicking noises. The next morning, both Vexthon and Zilara had fresh bite marks. Jake had stayed awake all night, but he had not seen anything enter or leave their rooms. Whatever was causing this was very good at staying hidden. Jake decided to do some research in the academy library. He spent the day reading about parasitic creatures from different worlds. Most of the information was about large, obvious parasites that were easy to spot and treat, but he did find some references to microscopic creatures that could hide in very small spaces. What bothered Jake most was the pattern of the bites. 3 small wounds in a perfect triangle was not random. It suggested intelligence and purpose. But what kind of creature would bite in such a specific pattern? By the second week, nearly 200 students were affected. The Zentari doctors were becoming desperate. They had tried every treatment they knew, but the bite wounds remained unchanged. Some students were getting sick from the slow-acting poison in the bites. Jake watched his friends getting weaker each day. Vexthon's crystal body was losing its bright glow. Zilara moved more slowly and seemed tired all the time. Other students were having worse problems. Some could barely get out of bed in the morning. The academy announced that they would close the exchange program in 3 days if no solution was found. All off-world students would be sent home immediately. Jake felt frustrated and helpless. There had to be an answer somewhere. That night, Jake sat in the library reading old Earth books about pest control and insect problems. Most of the information seemed too simple compared to the advanced alien science he had been studying. But as he read, something in his memory began to stir. He remembered summer nights at his grandmother's farm when he was little. She would sometimes complain about bugs in the house that bit people while they slept. She had old-fashioned ways of dealing with pest problems that did not involve fancy technology. Jake looked at the pictures in the Earth book showing different types of bite patterns. When he saw one particular image, his heart started beating faster. The pattern looked exactly like what he was seeing at the academy. 3 bites in a row, he whispered to himself, remembering his grandmother's voice. That is their calling card. For the first time since the problems began, Jake felt hope. Maybe the answer was not in advanced alien science. Maybe it was in the simple, practical knowledge his grandmother had taught him years ago on her small farm in Ohio. Jake stared at the picture in the old Earth book until his eyes watered. The image showed 3 small red dots arranged in a perfect triangle on human skin. The caption below read, "Common bed bug bite pattern, 3 bites in a triangular formation." His grandmother's voice echoed clearly in his memory from a summer evening years ago. Jake had been maybe 8 years old, staying at her farm for a week while his parents were away. He had woken up with itchy red bumps on his arm and had run crying to her kitchen. "Oh, honey, those are just bedbug bites," she had said, examining his arm with calm eyes. "See how they are lined up in threes? That is how you know for sure. 3 little bites in a row, that is their calling card." Jake remembered how his grandmother had not panicked or called a doctor. Instead, she had gone to her garden and picked specific plants. She had made a strong tea from the leaves and flowers, filling the house with a sharp, clean smell. Then she had washed all the bedding in the hot tea and sprayed it in the corners of every room. "The bugs hate this smell," she had explained as she worked. "It gets into their tiny brains and confuses them. They cannot think straight when they smell it, so they go away and bother someone else." Jake had not believed her simple solution would work, but the bites had stopped appearing after just one night. His grandmother had smiled and patted his head. "Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways, Jake. Remember that." Now, sitting in an alien library millions of miles from Earth, Jake finally understood what his grandmother had meant. The Zentari had advanced scanners and powerful computers, but they had never dealt with something like bedbugs before. Their technology was looking for complex threats, not simple pests. Jake closed the book and hurried back to his room. He needed to talk to Dr. Foster right away, but it was past midnight, and she would be sleeping. He spent the rest of the night, pacing and thinking, planning what he would say. Early the next morning, Jake found Dr. Foster in the medical center. She was examining bite samples under a powerful microscope, looking tired and frustrated. Dark circles under her eyes showed she had not been sleeping well. "Dr. Foster, I think I know what is causing the bites," Jake said. She looked up from the microscope with doubt in her eyes. "Jake, we have the best scientists in the galaxy working on this problem. What could you possibly know that they do not?" Jake pulled out the Earth book and showed her the picture. "Bedbugs. My grandmother dealt with them on her farm. The bite pattern is exactly the same." Dr. Foster studied the image carefully. "But Jake, the Zentari scanners would have detected Earth insects immediately. These buildings are cleaner than any hospital on Earth." "What if they are not exactly Earth bedbugs?" Jake asked. "What if they are some kind of alien version that works the same way? Maybe they came here on one of the transport ships and adapted to this environment." Dr. Foster was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see her thinking through the possibilities. Finally, she nodded slowly. "It is worth investigating. But how do we find creatures that the Zentari scanners cannot detect?" Jake explained his grandmother's methods. She had not used fancy equipment to find the bugs. Instead, she had looked for the signs they left behind: tiny blood spots on sheets, small dark stains in mattress seams, and a sweet, musty smell in rooms where they lived. "We need to check the student rooms manually," Jake said. "Look in cracks and corners where something very small could hide during the day." Dr. Foster agreed to help him search. They started with the rooms where the most severe cases lived. Using simple magnifying glasses and bright lights, they examined every inch of the walls, floors, and furniture. In the third room they searched, Jake found something interesting. In a tiny crack where 2 wall panels joined, he saw small dark spots that looked like dried blood. When he shined his light into the crack, something moved quickly away from the beam. "There," Jake whispered. "Did you see that?" Dr. Foster looked where he was pointing. "I saw something, but it moved too fast. It was smaller than a grain of sand." They continued searching and found similar signs in several other rooms. The pattern was clear. The worst affected rooms had the most evidence of tiny creatures living in the walls. But whenever they tried to get a closer look, the creatures seemed to vanish. Jake remembered something else his grandmother had said. "Bedbugs are sneaky little things. They know how to hide better than any creature on Earth. They only come out when they think it is safe." That gave Jake an idea. Instead of trying to catch the creatures during the day when they were hiding, maybe they needed to observe them at night when they were active. But the night searches had not worked before because the creatures were too small and quick to see. Jake asked Dr. Foster to help him get permission to use some special equipment from the biology lab. He wanted to set up cameras with very powerful magnification in several student rooms. If the creatures were really like bedbugs, they should come out to feed during the sleep cycle. Professor Kailash was skeptical when they explained their plan, but he was desperate enough to try anything. "You believe these are simple parasitic insects?" he asked. "Our scanners should detect any known insect species." "Maybe they are not a known species," Jake suggested. "Maybe they evolved here or came from somewhere the scanners have never encountered before." That night they set up the equipment in 5 different rooms, including Vexthons and Zilaras. The cameras were connected to monitors in the medical center, where Jake and Dr. Foster could watch without disturbing the sleeping students. For the first few hours, nothing happened. The cameras showed only the sleeping students in their beds. Jake began to worry that his theory was wrong. Maybe these were not bedbugs at all and he was wasting everyone's time. Then, around 3 in the morning, something appeared on Zilara's camera. A tiny shadow moved along the wall near her sleeping platform. It was so small that Jake almost missed it, but the movement was unmistakable. "Look at screen 3, Jake whispered to Dr. Foster. She leaned forward and watched as more tiny shadows appeared. The creatures seemed to phase in and out of visibility, like they were not entirely solid. That explained why the Zentari scanners could not detect them properly. "What are they?" Dr. Foster asked. Jake watched as several of the creatures approached. Zilara's sleeping form. They moved in perfect coordination, 3 of them positioning themselves on her arm in a triangular pattern. Then they seemed to become solid just long enough to bite, before fading back into their shadow-like state. "They are some kind of quantum bedbugs," Jake said, hardly believing his own words. "They can shift between dimensions or something, which is why the scanners miss them. But their behavior is exactly like the bedbugs my grandmother dealt with." Dr. Foster stared at the screen. "If you are right, then we need to treat them like bedbugs. But will Earth methods work on alien creatures?" Jake thought about his grandmother's tea and the way it had made the bugs disappear overnight. "We have to try," he said. "It is the only idea we have left." The next morning brought more bad news. 15 more students had fresh bite marks, and some of the earlier victims were getting seriously ill. The academy announced that all off-world students would be evacuated in 48 hours. Jake knew he was running out of time. He had to convince the Zentari doctors to try his grandmother's simple remedy, even though it sounded crazy compared to their advanced medical treatments. The lives of hundreds of students might depend on whether anyone would listen to the wisdom of an old farm woman from Ohio.